Stepping back as well, I think, there was a big push to, sign these cloud vendors like Microsoft and saying, oh, okay, but well, we want our data to stay within our country.
Mhm.
Um, and even though the data might still be in the country, um, and I think this was kind of the point is, well, the data might be there, but they can still shut off your access to that data. So
They
you know,
control the core.
the control,
So
yeah. So
I'll go right back to what I said at the beginning. It's about control. Who owns your data? Who owns
yeah,
the services that access your data, and how it's used? Because even with all of the classic contractual and wrapping that we put around these things, the companies that are managing these things are not necessarily beholden to everything in your government as much as you may want them to.
welcome to the You're Doing It Wrong podcast. I'm your host, Christian. Joining us today is newly appointed CEO of Fragile to Agile, Archie Reed. Thanks for joining me, Archie.
Thanks for having me.
Um, you are jumping into a new step in your career, but give us a little background of your journey and what this next step as CEO means for you.
Well, again, thanks for having us on the podcast. I guess my background has been built with the help of a lot of people as mentors and supporters over the years. And I've had the opportunity to work across some amazing technologies, business transformation, and even leadership in various roles. And I've worked in global tech companies like HPE, HP Enterprise for many, many years,
Mm.
all the way back to startups, which is actually how I ended up in HP at one point. They bought a security startup that I'd been founding with some guys out of Texas when I was in the US. And HP were looking for a security solution amongst many. I guess taking on the CEO role at Fragile to Agile is kind of a bit of an exciting next step, and I couldn't be happier. Uh, Fragile to Agile, they specialize in enterprise architecture and a unique sort of way of dealing with that business to architecture type link, as well as everything else that you might find in other models. But we're also starting to lead with AI accelerators and all the other sort of elements of technology that people could want. But we are vendor agnostic, so we don't have partnerships with vendors. And I guess that's sort of why they've been so successful. They're brought in when there are challenges and people want to put the right thing in the right place at the right time. So yeah, pretty exciting for me. Pretty gung ho for what the company can do and where we can go to. But let's talk about the key things that you wanted to talk about today.
Getting back to you as CEO, just as a follow-on from my last podcast episode, we talked about leaders leading and setting some big goals. Is there any big goals or things you want to accomplish in the near term as CEO? Just putting it out there.
Yeah, I guess for the company,
Yeah.
it's a goal to really cement our presence on the East Coast in Australia and the West Coast. We're an Adelaide-based company. We do have work around Australia. We do have work in America, in the Middle East, and in the UK and parts of Europe as well. But the biggest gap, short term, is we started to grow, or at least the history of the company is we started to grow on the east coast of Australia in 2018-19, and then COVID affected us probably like many organisations. Everything was drawn back. We couldn't send resources over, and therefore there was sort of a
Mm.
collapse inwards. And it's taken a while for a lot of companies to get back to the point where they're looking to grow or able to grow. It's been a real consolidation effort. Part of the me coming in is to free up some of the key resources so they can go out and develop business there. But I also have a lot of relationships on the East Coast as well. We've had some recent success in Western Australia, so that's good to see. And we intend to grow with that as well as all those other locations that I mentioned. So short term, I definitely want to see, our foothold here in Australia be increased. Longer
Mm.
term, we have some global aspirations.
Yeah, nice. Well, that's good to see that you're setting some goals and you have clear goals of what's happening there, what you want to accomplish. So,
We do.
um, one of the things I've wanted to bring you on for is a topic that has been in the news for several months now, and there's some contention I know around what started it. But the idea is that Microsoft may have cut off an email account for uh, the International Criminal Court uh, in Europe for the lead
Mhm.
prosecutor there. Um, and this started a whole bunch of discussion with some European countries around digital sovereignty, around them being able to own and have control over one, their data, and two, the services, the digital services that they need. And this has been a big, maybe a finally a wake up call around SaaS, right? So the last 10, 15 years, the push was, yeah, move to SaaS. It's great. And it is great. I'm not saying it's not. But there is
Been a
a
major
major
part of my
drawback.
experience and career.
Yeah. So, um, what do you think about this sort of wake up call? Is this a wake up call for people to rethink SaaS?
Well, I guess one of the things I didn't talk about is I've been in and out of the security area for uh, nigh on 30 years, which may date me a little bit. But uh, when we get to SaaS, I was not at the founding of, but pretty close to the early stages of the development of the Cloud Security Association, and spent a lot of time working on the standards, the efforts, the understanding, as much as the education of business about what it means to go to these various platforms as a service
Right.
platforms, not SaaS specifically, but the entire stack, the early NIST development of the various as a service options and marketing expansions on those things. So I've got a little bit of an insight into the security piece of it, but reflecting that back to the business about what the risk is kind of key. And when it comes to what's happened here, you are essentially getting services from another company. And before we go into the digital sovereignty sort of discussion,
Yeah.
you've got to realize that this is a variation on what businesses have done for years. Whether you want to outsource, right source, whether you want to purchase a capability from outside the organization, that's what we do as a matter of course. And the risk here, when we get to multinationals providing our services, is where and why are they beholden to certain things? So digital sovereignty, if you look at it, it's almost when you from the business side, uh, what power do you have over your capability and assets? And ultimately, if we're talking digital sovereignty, it's who owns your data, who manages your technology, and who sets the rules
Yeah.
for your operations. So for the business, and when we think about what happened at the ICC as an example, uh, when that action was taken, whoever took it, did they have control over their destiny? And they didn't really. They were beholden to what happened.
And this, there's a big push by the EU now to work with some of the cloud vendors, Amazon, AWS, and I believe Microsoft as well, are setting up European entities that maybe just that are disconnected from the rest of AWS and the rest from Azure, but will then be able to, if there were some sort of international issue, I guess you could say, political issue, that they would still be able to, the EU would still be able to run that business without interference from another country, say the US. Um, and it's not only the US that some of these companies are in, but it goes to anything you do in the SaaS world, and you're putting it out there, and you might have a multinational or that's operating those systems. Um, I guess there are options here on using SaaS with and still
Always.
being able to own your data. And I look at it as everyone should have a proper BCP plan or disaster recovery plan uh, that has digital sovereignty as part of that.
We agree, absolutely. And I've worked with a number of clients just recently on some of those issues. And funnily enough, sovereignty was part of the issue or consideration as to where they go and what they do. In fact, one of the organisations based here in Australia is part of or has to respond to local legislation around Sochi. And they had to have sovereign presence. They had to have almost state level control over where their data was. So if we step back to that ICC example, there was actually a good article in, I think it was Politico back in June, where they sort of talked through the particular issue. The AP saying, Microsoft had cancelled this, Microsoft coming back and saying, we actually had nothing to do with this, and all the while there was an executive order saying that Kareem Khan, who was the prosecutor for ICC that had this impact them, uh, essentially the executive order said they'd engaged in illegitimate or I think it was baseless actions. I'm not quite sure what that means, but
Right.
it meant that something from a political pressure was now impacting a commercial arrangement. So Microsoft said they had nothing to do with it, all well and good. But ultimately, they also said that they would defend clients against any sort of order to suspend or kill European cloud operations, as I remember it. They said they would change their contracts to support organizations, and that, especially in terms of the European government and the European Commission, they wouldn't necessarily do anything to impact their ability. And then it sort of all got a bit messy with that particular incident coming about. So, for any sort of organization seeking a local or trusted cloud provider, if you're concerned about those sort of things, is the obvious thing.
Yeah.
Potentially looking at multi cloud strategies. These are all sort of things that we sort of look at when we're talking about a strategy that makes sense. And yeah, there are options, but even local cloud providers are often forced into arrangements with the global cloud providers. So it's just something you've got to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, sometimes the offering is too good and cost effective.
Up front, yes.
Depending on the economics and your business, but can be just really really good value and difficult to replicate, especially email. Email's expensive to run on prem. Of course, it's much easier to go to Office 365 or something like that.
Well,
Um,
there's an interesting thing there, right? Because email being a perfect example, you end up with this. It costs a lot to run. It costs a lot to secure, and therefore options like Office 3 or Microsoft 365 become very much something that's compelling. Until you look at all of the risk factors, which may change your mind. And the risk factors would include political interference. It could include these are the obvious targets. Here's the kingdom. Everything goes into one vendor. The you may reduce risk by going with a digitally sovereign sort of option.
Yep.
Uh, it enhances compliance, perhaps. It supports your national interest, all those good things. But too much focus on that might end up with you limiting access to the capabilities that cost too much, innovative options that come up because they're building for the entire world as opposed to just local
Yeah.
requirements. And ultimately, complexity comes in, right? You've got many things to manage that may not be cohesive.
Yeah. Um, and stepping back as well, I think, there was a big push to, sign these cloud vendors like Microsoft and saying, "Oh, okay, but well, we want our data to stay within our country."
Mm-hmm.
Um, and even though the data might still be in the country, um, and I think this was kind of the point is, well, the data might be there, but they can still shut off your access to that data. So
They
you know
control the core.
they control.
So
Yeah. So
I'll go right back to what I said at the beginning. It's about control. Who owns your data? Who owns
yeah,
the services that access your data, and how it's used? Because even with all of the classic contractual and wrapping that we put around these things, the companies that are managing these things are not necessarily beholden to everything in your government as much as you may want them to. And I know, by way of example, if you want to go into the US, you've got to sign up or to all their obligations as a corporate citizen over there. Same in Australia, but you have multinationals coming into Australia, into the UK, into all sorts of countries, and they're setting up various ways that management is held somewhere else. The sales is in those countries, and the agreements don't necessarily apply to everything that's going on.
you talked a little bit about options of pulling stuff on prem, and the versus the big guys that are developing for the whole world. Um, I'm a big believer in open source,
Yeah,
as not for everything, obviously, but I believe that it does have its place, and there's a lot of great initiatives, for open source infrastructure platforms, to like Apache Cloud Stack, and OpenStack, that were built by some cloud vendors, early Rackspace, and others.
absolutely.
And there's some great platforms, and and I think 37 Signals has also shown that they're saving themselves millions of dollars by pulling their data on prem and
Right.
moving away from
Netflix did
Amazon.
the same thing.
So yeah, so it's there is some merit to you know still doing this on your own and not always using those platforms. Um, do you see people? I mean, do you see more and more people adopting multi-cloud or a hybrid commercial cloud and private cloud?
So increasingly, yes. Uh, I'll just touch on the point you made around open source for a second,
Yeah.
and I mean th- they've been going around for the last 25, 30 years in real strength, growing from strength to strength, and they sort of give you a bit of, I guess you could say, transparent control over what's actually going on. You do get the code if you need
Mm.
to. You aren't locked into a single vendor. You can go through an audit and extend it and do all those sort of wonderful things. And even if some global provider actually doesn't support it anymore, you can still bring most of that back. But have you got the internal capabilities to actually manage that if you choose that as the platform?
Yep.
Uh, and open source often means you can keep your essential services running if you do, no matter what happens at the political or corporate level. So that's great. But it comes back to, again, what we mentioned earlier, which is cost and complexity. Open source is often sold under it doesn't cost as much. It is easier because you get to see the code, but you still have to have the skills. You still
Yeah.
have to be of a size that if you really want to make that your production everything, you've got to have the skills in house to support and manage that. And the more you integrate, the more you've got to have those integration skills in house, as opposed to sort of standardized, albeit sometimes slower integrations that come with the bigger platforms. So, yeah, you get a lot of flexibility, you get less lock in, you end up with your own ability to, almost control your destiny there. But you've got a skills gap potentially. You've got, I guess, uh, I, I'll say commercial support is patchy, not
Yeah.
Apache, but a patchy sort of mishmash of things. Because Red Hat now with IBM, their goal was not to control the open source code, but to offer the support that most organizations don't have.
Yeah.
So you're back into a big multinational managing support for the open source that you thought you would have more control over. So you've got to build skills in managing open source stacks if that's what you want to go with. And that works for a lot of startups, not so much in the mid-size organization unless you are a technology organization.
Yeah. I've seen, a lot more adoption in the EU of open source because the governments are really pushing this, right? So the governments are purchasing support and adopting a lot of open source programs like Open Project and Nextcloud, and the governments, and smaller, cities and states around Europe are really pushing into this, and that, I believe, breeds this sort of ecosystem of support people, and smaller businesses that can really specialize in these type of open source platforms.
I
And
think we agree. It's sorry, didn't mean to cut
no,
you off
and
there.
I'm just going to say that you don't see that in Australia. I believe that all. Well, I know that there are some open source in some of the governments, but they pretty much, for platform level stuff and bigger solutions, they're pretty much going, with the corporate way. But I think as a as a sort of a to become a leader in technology and kind of change the workforce, I would suggest to, state governments, start pushing open source, because you might become, a new uh, uh, you know Silicon Valley, in a way.
I would love to see something to that effect happen in Australia, especially, but you're right about Europe. The reason why success is being seen is because there is such uh, a, a massive gravitational force sort of taking it forward with a directive as much as action that is happening there. And you can certainly point to France as an example. The adoption or almost pushing to one side of the major vendors in favor of open source is um, it's not a raison d'etre, is it? It's just what they believe in,
Yeah,
and they don't want to see too much control in the hands of anybody other than the French government, I guess. But that is the way they've operated. Coming back to your example, uh, Australia making an investment, for example, trying to create some sort of environment. I see part efforts. For example, I think I'm not sure whether it's South Australia or Australia wide, but I'm pretty sure it's just South Australia have just done an investment into local government using AI,
right.
and they're willing to back experiments with industry and partners and government departments as well as quasi-government departments to try and get AI usage properly set within the government and supporting organisations. Uh, Meantime, federal government are doing something completely different. So cohesiveness in the country might also help, as much as individual governments, state governments trying to grow the capability where they are.
Yeah. Yeah, I just I kind of view this. Yeah, it's easy to recruit people that know the Microsoft stack right into the organization.
Microsoft have invested so much into, especially the local governments in Australia, state and local or
Yeah,
regional, I guess.
and yeah, and it's and their platform, love it or hate it, is evolving super fast around the Azure environment and adopting AI and big data as they're trying to compete with Amazon and Google that have been doing it for longer. But it is moving at a super fast pace. Um, and I think it's going to continue to go back to that risk, and your money is all going again to this multinational, and yeah, it might make it easier, seem easier, but what are the missed opportunities around developing that something something locally that could then be sold around the world.
Well, there is a number of efforts that have happened over the last 10 years to investigate the financial dealings of large companies, in particular the American ones, Meta, Microsoft, Google, all transact in a way and send a lot of profit off to Ireland and the
Yep.
Irish Dutch sandwich, if you're familiar with any of
Yep.
those sort of things. Actually, all under threat right now because of political change in the US. And I'm not here to comment on whether that's good or bad, but the fact is, we put a lot of money into the coffers of multinational organizations, and the reciprocation is again patchy. Microsoft last year, or is it early this year, came and did a deal where they were investing $500 million into the Australian economy to support growth of AI,
Right.
funnily enough, on their platform, right? So maybe it does come back in a way. I can't remember whether it was 200 million or 500 million, but it was a big investment.
Yeah, I was going to say they'll make sure that they make that back pretty quick, I'm sure.
They will make, the point is, like they invested in local government, uh, and making sure everybody's trained, and there are good deals to get in on this. Once you're in, just whether it's Microsoft, SAP, Oracle, any of the big vendors, um, that they will try and make sure that their investments are sound and proper and have an ROI.
Yep.
But we're well off topic, perhaps, of
No.
sovereignty. But there's a reason why these organisations exist, right? As any good commercial organisation would. And I spent many years in the US, spent many years in Europe, for that matter, and now back in Australia. I I look at the Australian economy especially and go, we've got Atlassian and we've got. You have to pause for a second and
Yeah.
work out. I mean, Canva is an amazing success
Yep.
story, right? But we have so few, and so rarely are they mentioned that uh, I truly believe that the government needs to think more about not what the resources are in the ground as our only sort of major source of wealth. We have a highly educated workforce, huge opportunity, um, great capability, and yet we don't really, having done a couple of startups here in Australia, uh, the support, again, I hate to use the word again, but so patchy, so difficult. Um, it's challenging to be a successful startup in Australia.
Yeah.
And when they get successful, because I know the pull there to go to the US stock market or even London,
Hmm.
is because the financing and trading here in Australia is not as good as it could be in
Yeah.
those other markets.
Yeah. And I know there's a few that were bought out by US companies pretty quick on. I think Google Maps is being one of
Uh,
them. And
the
yeah.
technology, once it gets to a certain stage, is very attractive to those organizations, right? So that's great for them, but we lose that.
Yeah.
And we got to keep developing so we can have enough of a base that those sort of things are fine. will never compete at the scale of the US. Asia itself is as a group outperforms us, but
Mm.
individually maybe not so much. Europe and the UK, again, they buy up properties here in Australia as well. So we're back to almost a sovereignty type discussion again, which is how can we build our digital sovereignty across the sphere of technology?
Yeah, I see a lot of procurement guidelines around, okay, have a local vendor, but they're still just a reseller of the, the big multinational
Yeah, I worked
softwares. And
with
it's like, what's the point of that? You're still buying Microsoft. Somebody's just getting a 10% fee.
that's right, that's right, and I worked with I won't say who they were, but a local cloud networking provider a number of years ago on what their strategy should be around cloud. They had built their own capability, their own management interface.
Mm.
They already did hosting and everything up to and including cloud, private cloud, but they were getting swamped by Microsoft. They were getting swamped by even Google Cloud, and they were at a turning point. Do we keep investing in our own cloud when we're not, really selling against them? We're not winning against them in some
Mm.
cases. And they'd already thought about, do we partner with one of these providers or more? And we sort of went through the numbers, and we didn't shut down their private cloud because it had that sovereign option that the
Right.
global providers couldn't give. That was important to their government sales, important to other specific clients. But could they make it cost effective? Well, they could offset through some of the public cloud sales that they could make, taking a clip of the ticket and managing the entirety of an organization's networking, connectivity, cloud,
Yeah.
rack space, all that sort of stuff, and public cloud through one pane of glass. Uh, they've gone well. Again, I won't say who they are because there's a number of those folks here in Australia, but it was a turning point for the organization in some ways as to do they lean in on public cloud providers and the multinationals, or do they keep to their own knitting? Expanding out and offering all those options was what we chose, and they went ahead with that and became very successful with that.
Yeah. Well, I think you're not going to solely, um, like we said, just the cost aspect of like running your own email. You're not going to solely be independent unless you're a very large organization. So you're going to rely on some of the big guys and big SaaS providers. One of the things that I I feel with advent of cloud and SaaS is that say you have a finance application, you've
Mhm.
gone SaaS. What I think is really great about it is if you're using good SaaS provider, you should be able to swap to another SaaS platform fairly quickly. And to me, as sort of again, this is the digital sovereignty and BCP sort of planning where you're not getting locked in to one vendor. And I think that's for a lot of the SaaS providers, migrating into can be really easy. Um, they've made their platforms easy, and this is sort of this vendor locked in. And I sort of look at the SAPs and Oracles and sort of saying, with the old way of doing ERP was you get into this monstrosity and it was very difficult to get all your stuff in, and you put everything in the kitchen sink into this big platform, and then you're locked in for the rest of your life. And I think we see with a lot of these great, single um, capability systems, so maybe it's an HR platform, is separate to your finance platform, but the good ones are all have these great APIs, and it just allows you to swap that capability out for a different one in case a vendor gets too expensive or you realize for whatever reason you need to change, or they're not keeping up with the rest of the market, or they're
Well,
based in a different place. I think this is a great thing to be able to do that, but I see people still trying to go this old big monstrosity of an ERP. Have we changed yet? Have we gone? Do we need to go away from that viewpoint? Thoughts?
I was listening to you as you went through that lovely vision of what could be or should be, but is not.
Yeah.
And my experience, even recently, is that I guess I'll say three things. One is lovely vision, but it's not the reality and won't be the reality for a while. The reason for that is the vendors themselves are they have very large platforms. They offer lots of capabilities. And whether you're looking at infrastructure parity between AWS and Azure, whether you're looking at ERP parity between Oracle, SAP, some local vendors like Tech One, right? They're hard to get into, they're hard to get out of. Are they integrated with other stacks? No, that's why you have tools like MuleSoft and
Mm.
or Boomi and all the other sort of things that are out there to move data around, because they don't always integrate well with each other. And people want best of breed, or they're in the middle of migration and they need that integration to work. So you end up with lots of glue. Again, not necessarily a bad thing, but the vision you painted is, yeah, I want to swap that with that, is kind of difficult. One of the things that my second point is one of the things that can help, and dare I say, enterprise architecture, understanding what the business capabilities are and how they need to be connected, helps you work out whether you can take out a component or not. And if you've done it right, you can start to slice and dice things in a much easier way, such that that grouping of capabilities, those things that I need to run that part of the business, can be provided with another system or a best of breed or whatever that may be. And the integration is much easier to understand at that point. So, advocating for enterprise architecture there to solve some of those problems. In fact, just as an example, we recently got an organization that was moving from one platform to another. I won't say where they're from, but they're going to Workday. And Workday actually told them, if you haven't got your enterprise architecture under control, we're not sure we can guarantee success in what you're trying to do.
Well,
So they came and we're helping them with that particular situation now. And part of it is they had hundreds of applications out there that were doing things, duplicating or even tripling some things. But on top of that, they didn't know those applications were out in the business all the time. So
yeah,
there's lots of things, coming back to you. It'd be nice if they're all integrated and we could swap the best things out for the right things. But it's actually a really difficult thing. And then on top of all of that, you've got to deal with the fact that we now, through SaaS, as we started with, are dealing with a couple of key things that impact organizations. You've got to keep up. So there's sort of a window that you move in, which is you can stay there on those old platforms, but once you get into the SaaS window, you're now on a year or two maximum before you've got to move to the next version.
yeah,
So you're on the train.
yeah,
So organizations have got to be ready for that. Integrations and all those sort of things have got to follow along, and you've got to be able to support those, whether they're in the SaaS environment or inside your organization. Coming to the final point, which is we're back to who controls the data. And I've seen contracts from some of those vendors that actually say once the data goes in, we actually have control of that data layer.
yeah,
So understanding the legalities of what you're getting into is also critical for the business, because this is no longer just a technology decision.
yeah.
This is a whole business decision.
It all goes back to digital sovereignty. Who owns your data, and what are you willing to hand that over? And yeah, the risk might be low for most organizations, um, But for governments, they might want to start looking at this as a little bit more.
Well, I guess there's a sort of criteria set that each type of organisation might look at. If you're a government, you might advocate, in fact, mandate local hosting for not sovereign data for sensitive systems,
Yeah.
right? Anything that's government sensitive. Back to your point, is the government investing in these things? Perhaps they should develop sovereign cloud alternatives. And dare I raise the thing we haven't touched on yet, AI.
Mm,
When I look at the explosive growth, the development of LLMs, that technology, that capability, I actually believe is transformative for many organizations if they get it right, and will continue to be at a rapid pace.
yeah.
I I see various governments around the world developing sovereign capability around this now, and I'm not seeing that here in Australia enough. That this amazing, transformative, potentially risky capability is not something that we can control because it will control a lot of things the way it's
Yes.
going.
Yeah.
And perhaps the government is working on plans here. I know we've been working with an organisation, AI CoLab, out of Canberra, who are trying to bring in industry around AI to the government. And it's probably worth a look if you're looking to understand what the potential is. But even with those sorts of efforts, I don't think we're investing enough locally, both in the ecosystem of technologists as much as, in particular, AI, to protect ourselves against all these other types of challenges that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
So, again, government should be developing not just sovereign cloud alternatives, but sovereign AI alternatives and really investing in the industry to do that. And ultimately, help organizations with the right data sovereignty standards and really push those vendors to comply with those standards as we develop them. So I'm not looking for tight, absolute catch-all type things, but I think we could do a lot better.
One of the things with AI is actually that there's tons of open source, really great open source um, models out there.
Mm-hmm.
From OpenAI, which is ChatGPT is based on. Google has
Now,
Gemini, that a version of Gemini as well as the DeepSeek and
yeah,
all
I
the
mean,
others.
Meta have got Llama out
Yeah.
there. There's, you go
So
up to Hugging Face, you can get all sorts of, small,
yeah,
large, medium, whatever size model you want. Some, specialized in things already fine tuned for a task or something like that. And we should move on from that. If you take the example of DeepSeek and the effort and the paper that was written on that, they gave a blueprint for how to develop these at a reasonable cost. And while there are, I'm not going to tear apart their paper, but there were a lot of really straightforward, logical things that they did to short circuit the cost of developing these things now that we have a patent. So much so that you see the big vendors taking those steps themselves sometimes. But my point is, they took it, they developed it for 1/10 the cost. Uh, the patterns are there that we could use to create sovereign capability, and it's in a cost profile that is effective, all the way down to the open source type starter points.
yeah,
And that is something that people are experimenting with, but it's not a complete program of work for
yeah,
our country.
and a lot of it. I mean, these LLMs are great, as just general chat things, but where obviously the agentic models, when you start putting it against your own data, is where businesses and governments can really see tons of value, and that goes again to where is that data and how are they going to access it? And so if so much of it is in Microsoft's cloud stack, and then you're
Mhm.
going to be using Microsoft's, AI Studio and Copilot Studios there.
Some
So
people have bought into that. That
yeah,
they know that that's the easiest, One client said, "This is the path of least resistance," and I
Yeah.
said, "Yeah, that's how it starts." So, uh, whatever story you want to tell, but I do a lot of we call them AI accelerators, strategic and tactical, setting up your governance, your strategy, your policies, and all that sort of stuff while experimenting, getting an understanding of that. And what I find, in fact, we're up in the Philippines a few months ago. They had gone whole hog, rolled out Gemini to everybody in the company, offered training to everybody, and uh, they'd had a 50% uptake, right? When I asked, had they measured how effective that uptake was, because that was their target. That was an acceptable
Yeah.
target, 50%. But they couldn't say how effective that was. And that was simple use of Gemini in Google Suite. So on top of that, when we sort of took the conversation back, as I have with many organizations, I find the spectrum of fears is sort of governing what's going on. Uh, from one end of the spectrum, you've got fear of missing out, right? I've
Yep.
read it in the magazine. Our competitors are doing it. Everybody's doing it. Why aren't we doing it? Go, go, go. IT, this is an IT problem. Go sort it. On the other end of the spectrum is, to your point, who has access to our data? We fear, I read all these horror stories. I've seen the movies. AI taking over. We can't give them access, let alone the sovereignty issue of AIs from other countries having access to our data. Why would I give AI access to my calendar? And
Yep.
you sort of go, well, in a way, it's already there, but okay, I get your point. You've got this spectrum of fears, and across that, you have fear of making the wrong choice. Yes, we want to do it, but we're paralyzed by choice. It reminds me a lot of back in the days of early cloud adoption, in that, are we doing the right thing? Who's going to have access to our data? We created all these standards. And I will say that my buddies at the Cloud Security Association have a bunch of frameworks for understanding how to apply AI, because a lot of that is cloud based, but they've
Right.
developed it broader than that. There are a lot of frameworks out there that can give, I guess, cohesiveness to how you understand what the risks are. And when I go talk to organizations and we talk about where do they fit on this spectrum, uh, and it can be varied across a board or leadership team. Each one of the members can exhibit one of those fears.
Mm.
When you put it into the framework and you can address the risk and address the return, then you can start to have a real conversation. The biggest challenge and difference I see uh, in a simple way between what happened with cloud and AI is just the sheer speed at which things are changing,
Yeah.
right? You think about Amazon having thousands of services right now because they've developed over a decade and a half, nearly 2 decades. Uh, when it comes to AI, these things are rolling almost weekly,
Yeah.
if not monthly. And you, just by way of one example, this very week, OpenAI roll out GPT-5 and take away GPT-4.
Yep.
Right? Now, I've done experiments where we're moving from one to the other and they provide very different answers. So just ripping that capability away from some people and getting a completely different version of the answer, that's not usually how business works unless you're in the creatives.
Yeah. Although
Anyway, that was a long
Microsoft is
rant
great at
about
that too.
what's going on.
Yeah. Um, no, you've hit some good points there. Around yeah, the AI is moving so fast, and where do we go from here? But it also points to, as you discussed before, with Workday saying, you need to have some enterprise architecture to kind of help you guide, this way forward. Um, and I think the big one that I see for enterprise architecture is a lot of companies don't value it, or they don't believe there's some sort of return on investment for it. Do you see that? I mean, do you see fighting that fight?
So, absolutely. In fact, the founder of Fragile to Agile has spent multiple decades fighting the good fight for enterprise architecture, and part of the challenge that he saw and solved was the business primarily seeing this as just a technology thing. So being able to reconcile what the technology services arena looks like as much as the business services arena to the business goals, the strategy, the vision, the intent of the business is what we spend time doing. And it's kind of key in that when I look back over my experience, decade and a half at HP or HP Enterprise, we looked at TOGAF, we looked at ITSM, ITL, various frameworks to try and bring these things together. There was a lot of resistance in organizations when we would come in, even as a service organization, and go, can we document this stuff? What have you got? What are your processes, your standards, your services that you're running? What are we taking on? What do you still want to manage? And all of these things help with those discussions, as
Right.
much as we've been through a number of exercises now where we map opportunities for AI adoption and give them various scales, risk and value and those types of things across the organization, across the capabilities. And just like automation, you might go, well, where are we spending a lot of time? And it could be automated. Yeah, it's these connections here, it's these services. Same with AI. You go in and you say, okay, let's look at the map. Oh, you don't have a map. Let's talk enterprise architecture
Mm.
because that'll help us solve a lot of problems, including this AI one. And once we've got some idea of that, doesn't have to be perfect, but some idea of what that looks like, you can go, these are the pain points. These are the areas where if we put AI in and we put automation in, imagine, no, let's actually experiment with that and see if it works. So the discussion changes when you have a map of what is actually going on in the business, and people can literally walk up to it and go, yep, this to this, we could wipe out that entire thing and save ourselves days of effort because it goes through three people and achieves one thing.
Yeah.
So very simple example. We spend a lot of time getting around that, and it doesn't come for free, but the value is immense.
Mm. Yeah. I've seen. I investigated a business process where actually I realized that someone's job was basically meaningless, and of course nobody wanted to address it. But it was like everything they do goes nowhere, and so there's a whole
Yep.
lot of work around feeding data to that person in the right way so they can do their thing, but then it's not actually used. So why are they doing it? But that's just what they've been doing. So you would think that would be an
You
easy
would.
way to
But
save money. But
uh, I will say that it doesn't only help you with those things. I know earlier we probably didn't touch on it in this particular conversation, but another conversation. You talked about being nimble,
mm,
and it means being able to evaluate where you're at, and really be able to describe where the opportunities are. And if that means switching a business process, if that means switching some core tech, back to your example around the big guys versus arguably a best of breed or some sort of interconnect, technical lock-in,
yeah,
whether commercial, architectural, business-based, it can all stall innovation. And ultimately, that's where things like enterprise architecture are able to help. So I guess what I'm saying is, once you've got those sort of things sorted, you can do innovation quicker. And depending on your definition of innovation, I generally look at it as new capabilities or services out into the market more than we've got the latest tech in. It helps negotiate because when you get those big vendors coming at you, whether they are ERP or AI saying, let's go, you've actually got an understanding of how your business operates versus how they think it operates.
Mm.
And, you know, you have a lot more control, not only over your data because you know where it is and how it's managed, over your systems because you know how they work, but how changes in processes, in business strategy will impact what's going on in your business.
Yeah. And you can make informed decisions.
Ah, yes, yes, making informed decisions. We all like that, don't we?
Yeah. Um, Archie, I don't really have anything else for you. I think made some great points. You've explained, some great benefits for enterprise architecture in a much better way than I could.
I'm
And
not sure about that, but
uh,
I've listened to a few of your podcasts.
thanks. But do you have any parting shots you want to make, or anything else you want to mention?
Look, actually, we covered everything I thought I might have to wrap up with. So, all I will say, yeah, we love enterprise architecture, but I am not gung ho about AI, but this is fundamentally changing how we operate. There are a lot of fears out there, as I said. That's a conversation that I love having with people because understanding what's in their minds helps sort of
Yep.
actually raise some opportunities. But talking about where they could go and showing them that there is a way is what I love to do. And I've got to say, being CEO at a new company, this is a role I never thought I'd go for, but it's another C-level role in my cap, and the team here is just awesome.
It's going to be a challenge for enterprise architects to keep up with the change in AI and where it's going. But I think
A challenge for
anyone,
everybody, not
if for
just the
everybody,
architect.
yeah. But it does really stem from, as you mentioned, so much can benefit from having good enterprise architecture, and an enterprise architect, helping, you know, uh, uh, just map this stuff out so that you can be nimble and you can.
Because it helps you, but it makes you be nimble, but not churn.
Hmm,
Uh, and that's another fear that I've seen is, holy crap, you came in a week ago and now there's 5 other things we could do with this AI stuff. Are we missing out? Are we doing the wrong thing? Analysis paralysis.
yeah.
So that churn really undermines your ability to manage business. But if you manage it right, if you have the framework and understand the business right, you're making the right decisions. You're not increasing technical debt by in AI, which is, oh, you get something this week and something better comes out next week. Yeah, that can happen.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you change,
No. No. Are you
right?
still getting your
It's
benefits? Are you still meeting the goals you set out to?
absolutely
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time, Archie. It's been great talking with you, and good luck as CEO with Fragile to Agile.
really appreciate it. Thanks for the time.
Thanks for joining us today. And if you have any questions for the guests, pop them into the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe.